Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about how security forces in Jammu and Kashmir are struggling to find the militants responsible for the death of 9 security personnel. We also talk about how e-commerce companies are exploring faster ways to deliver grocery items. But first, we talk about the fire at a hospital in Bhopal. Earlier this week on Monday in Bhopal, a fire broke out in the children's ward of the Kamla Nehru Hospital. In this fire, at least 4 infants died. It has since come to light that the hospital was not adequately prepared for such a situation and did not have the appropriate safety measures in place. In this segment, Iram Siddiqui, who reports on Madhya Pradesh for the Indian Express, joins us on a call from Bhopal to talk about it. So, Iram, what do we know about how the fire started in the hospital?
So, Shashank, as per the fire officer, the fire is said to have broken out at around 8:30 p.m. They received the first call about the fire at 8:30 p.m. They sent the fire engines by 8:45. The fire, according to them, broke out because of an electrical short circuit. There was a spark in the main unit of the SNCU ward. The special newborn care unit of the Kamla Nehru Hospital had a lot of equipments. You have warmers, ventilators in which these babies are kept on oxygen support and ventilators and so on and so forth. So a spark started in the main unit and it soon spread and caught onto these equipments, the ventilators, the warmers, and that quickly spread across the ward. That's how the fire started. However, the officer also very interestingly mentioned that it was a very small fire, in the sense it was just one unit. Say, for example, one of the machines, they are not very sure if it was a ventilator or a warmer, which caught fire. And had the hospital staff been more mindful and alert and sort of segregated that particular ventilator or that machine out of the room, it wouldn't have been so bad as it turned out to be. The fire could have been easily contained. So this is how the fire started and that's how it spread. It was brought under control within 30 minutes.
And could you talk about how people in the hospital sort of reacted immediately after the fire started?
So soon after the fire broke out in that ward, there was complete panic and chaos. Because what happened was people started running in and out of the ward and the fire very quickly spread, and because it was an electrical fire, there was very thick black smoke that made very difficult for people to even see exactly how many kids are there left behind inside the ward. And in fact, if I'm not wrong, there was this one particular nurse and a ward boy who also collapsed because of the smoke. So it was that bad. So technically what happened at that ward was there was a small fire. So one of the infant died. It belonged to this Yadav family. They lost their twin babies. One had died on the night of the fire and the other died on Tuesday evening. So this Yadav family was inside the ward. They had gone to meet the doctor to ask them what kind of injections they were demanding. And that is exactly the point, according to them, when the fire broke out. So they said that there was a spark and one of the machines suddenly caught fire. And the staff, instead of trying to pull that machine out, began panicking. Now, they also said that we tried to figure out if there was a fire extinguisher. They found fire extinguishers there, but some of them were empty. Some just didn't open. We can't say if they were not able to use the fire extinguisher or these fire extinguishers were defunct. But a lot of them were also empty. So whatever efforts were made by these people there didn't work. And by the time the fire brigade came in and over the next 30 minutes and they tried to bring the fire under control, it was too late. I mean, the whole ward was engulfed in thick black smoke and it made it difficult for the people to even stand and see what was before them. So it was pretty bad. And there was no space for the smoke to go out. So the smoke that was emanating from the wires and the machine that was burnt was confined in that particular unit, which was basically packed with glass. After a point of time, some of the relatives or, the parents and the relatives of these babies, they broke the glasses to ensure that the smoke out of that ward. So these things happened.
You mentioned one of the fire extinguishers not working and the general chaos. Is it then fair to say that the hospital was not adequately prepared for such an eventuality?
Of course, the hospital authority was not equipped at all. We can say this because the hydraulic system within the building was not working. According to fire officers, they had to struggle a lot. Whatever fire equipments were there, like fire extinguishers, were not working. This is also something that the fire officers have confirmed. Now, apart from that, the construction began in 1995. It was completed somewhere around 2001, 2002. It began functioning in 2003. So it was constructed by this department called Capital Project Administration. It's a wing of the urban planning department of the government that is into construction of government buildings. That building was constructed by this particular department. It was constructed as a multi-specialist hospital to cater to the victims of Bhopal gas tragedy. But over the period of time, anyways, it was used by the Hamidia Hospital. Now, Hamidia Hospital is the largest government-run hospital of Bhopal. A lot of units of Hamidia Hospital, such as their burnt unit, their neonatal care center, and other such things, ophthalmology department, are stationed in this Kamla Nehru Hospital, which is within the campus of Hamidia Hospital, also called as Gandhi Medical College. It's a medical college and hospital. So this building was constructed by a CPA. It fell under the Department of Gas Speeded Department. There's a government department called the Gas Rahat Department for the upkeep and maintenance of the victims of gas tragedy. So the building was under that particular department. It was being used by Gandhi Medical College. So neither of these three agencies ever bothered to get a fire NOC. According to the Bhopal Municipal Commissioner, they have been routinely issuing notices to all establishment urging them to get their NOC. What happens in Bhopal is that the audit is not done by the BMC or the fire department themselves. They have a panel of experts, fire audit team. You have to go to them, install your stuff, get a fire audit done by them. Once they approve it, an NOC is issued by the fire department. So Kamla Nehru Hospital never bothered to get any kind of NOC since the time it began functioning, which was in 2003, 2004.
And unfortunately, I think that is the case with a lot of buildings in India, both government and private. But also, now that this tragedy has happened, what action has the government taken so far?
So immediately after this incident happened on Monday evening, Chief Minister Shivraj Singh Chauhan ordered an inquiry by the Additional Chief Secretary Health, Mr. Mohammad Suleiman, to basically understand what went wrong and who's responsible for it. Although the report is not yet out, but on Wednesday, which is today, they've removed the Dean and Superintendent of Gandhi Medical College. They've also removed the Director of Gas Rahat Department because the building was under them. And they've also suspended a sub-engineer of CPA. Now, according to Medical Education Minister Vishwas Sarang, this is being done because the responsibility is not just of one person. Of course, the dean and superintendent is directly responsible for the upkeep and maintenance of the hospital. The onus also lies on CPA, which is generally tasked with maintenance of these buildings, and the gas Rahat department because the building was under them. So these are the four people who three of them have been removed from their present post and one has been suspended.
And Iram, you have also written about this man named Rashid Khan. His infant nephew was there in the hospital when the fire broke out. And during this time, he managed to save the lives of at least 8 infants. Could you talk a bit about him and how he managed to do this?
Of course. So for Rashid, it was very tragic for the family for various reasons. Firstly, because it was the first baby that Rashid's sister Irfana gave birth to after 14 years of marriage, and it was a very difficult pregnancy. Rashid was not at the hospital at that point of time. He received a call from his sister saying that the ward has caught fire. He was having dinner at his house, which is about a few kilometers away, in the sense I think 3 or 4 odd kilometers away. He immediately rushed to the hospital. He told me that he reached in less than 5 minutes after hearing about it. He said when he reached there, it was total chaos. He said not just the families of the babies, but also a lot of hospital staff was trying to remove these babies from the ward and shift them into the adjoining wards or the other wards. He immediately started working with them. He said, in that moment, it did not occur to me that I should look for my nephew. because every baby that was lying in front of you was an innocent life that had to be saved. In that moment, as a human being, he said, it never occurred to me that I should first go and look for my nephew. He said, whatever baby was there in front of me, I started pulling off the wires of the equipments or the oxygen mask and all of that and taking the baby out into the adjoining ward. He said, I managed to rescue around 8 or 9 babies when the nurse or the doctor there said ki ho gaya hai, sab bacche nikal gaye hain. He said, when doctor there told me ki all the babies have been rescued, I was relieved. I said, fine, now you can sit back. He said, in that moment, after we were told that all the babies have been removed, we tried to sort of block the room in a way that the smoke does not come out and sort of spread to the other wards. And at that point of time, he was not aware that his baby was still inside. It's only a couple of minutes later that, according to Rashid, that the hospital staff also realized that not all babies have been rescued. But of course, the family by then didn't know that how many had died or if some of them had died. He said it was around 3 a.m. So what had happened in that moment was not all babies were put in one ward. Depending upon the equipments that were available, some babies were put in some wards, some babies were put in some other wards, and there were a couple of babies who were also shifted to another hospital. So they started running from one ward to the other over the next couple of hours. And it was only by 3 a.m. when they realized that their baby was nowhere that they went to the doctor, and the doctor said, why don't you go and check on the second floor? There are 4 babies kept there. He said, when they said that, that's when I realized that they're asking me to go to the morgue. And when he went there, he realized that amongst the 4 babies, one of them was his nephew. He told me that his only thought at that point was that instead of looking for my nephew, if I just save these infants, these babies, God will certainly, ensure that our baby is safe. That were his words. So I met him outside the graveyard on Tuesday because they were handed the body by Tuesday morning after all the formalities were completed, and he had just gone there to sort of bury the baby. So, yeah.
Yeah, and also, after all this happened, the opposition in the state has been calling out the government, and it has been asking the government to take the necessary actions. Could you talk a bit about that?
So the opposition, the Congress, has also raised a lot of questions. The government has ordered an inquiry which is headed by ACS Health, who's heading the same department. I mean, how do you give an inquiry to be conducted by the head of the same department? So the Congress is saying that the inquiry into that incident should be conducted by either a retired or a serving High Court judge to ensure that the probe is impartial and nobody is trying to save anybody else. Now, secondly, interestingly, they've also said that all of those who have been either removed from their post or suspended are just made scapegoats, while the onus should be on people who are right up in the authority, including the ACS Health himself. So, Congress spokesperson Bhupendra Gupta said that 5 years ago, a woman had suffered some injuries to her leg owing to sort of mismanagement at the hospital, and then the ACS Health had to go out. And then when we are not even sure if the death toll is exactly at 4 or if it is much more than that, and the hospital is underplaying that. And in such a scenario, is it only that the dean and the superintendent of the hospital is responsible for such a thing, or does the onus of the responsibility lie much higher up in the authority?
And next we talk about militants in Jammu and Kashmir. Last month, 9 soldiers were killed by militants in the Poonch district of Jammu. And after that, the security forces launched an operation to find the people responsible for it. Now, it has been more than a month since the operation started, but the forces still haven't been able to capture anyone. This operation has turned out to be one of the longest against militants in J&K. In this segment, Nirupama Subramanian, who reports on South Asian affairs for the Indian Express, joins us to talk about this operation and the red flags it has raised for the Indian security. So, Nirupama, it has been over a month since the Poonch operation started. What challenges are the security forces facing in trying to catch the people responsible?
So, Shashank, you're right. The operation began on the 10th of October. I think, late in the night. And in the early hours of October 11th was when the first 5 soldiers were killed in an ambush. And then on the 14th of October was when 4 more soldiers were killed. So really, the hunt for these militants who were believed to be hiding in this 150 square kilometer of very inhospitable terrain high up in one of the ridges of the Pir Panjal, which is the mountain range that borders Poonch and Rajouri. Poonch and Rajouri are, of course, districts right on the LOC, and the Pir Panjal is on the other side, and it is the main passageway to South Kashmir. So this whole hunt was going on in one of the upper reaches of a ridge on the Pir Panjal, and it's supposed to be very densely forested. It's supposed to be inhospitable. The visibility is very low, is what some officers have told me. It has got undergrowth as well as trees packed closely together. So there's no visibility at all. So this is where this operation has been going on.
Okay, so the terrain and low visibility are challenges for the security forces. And you write that during the first 25 days, they tightened the cordon in one area, but they couldn't find anyone. And then last weekend, they searched in another bordering district, but were again unable to find anyone. So has the search been called off now?
So it hasn't yet been called off in that sense, but there is a feeling, I think, among senior officials that these militants are there in the first place. They are no longer there now. So this is where we are at right now.
Okay, and you also write that this entire thing has also raised red flags for the security forces. Could you talk about what these red flags are?
See, from what I gather in my conversations with security officials is that this is the first time in a long while that they've actually come across what seem to be very well-trained militants. They seem to be well-trained in the use of arms as well. They seem to have been equipped with rifles. And also, I think because of the thick forest, they seem to have a tactical advantage, which they really use. They knew how to use it.
And the fact that these militants were trained and have been able to evade the forces for so long, that is not usually the case, right?
Yeah, basically these guys seem to be prepared for a long haul. They knew how to survive in a jungle. They seem to have logistics, all that. If you look at the pattern of encounters that have taken place in, say, Kashmir, there, if you notice, the pattern is that these guys who get trapped in houses or in a village or, they're very raw, meaning they seem to have no training at all. They barely know how to hold a pistol or a gun. And they are very easy in that sense to capture or kill. Mostly they've been killed, of course. In this case, not only have they evaded this massive search operation, they've also managed to take our soldiers by surprise, not once, not twice, but 3 times. So they seem to have this tactical advantage over our guys all the time they've had. And what my sources tell me is that, look, it's like playing a game of hide and seek. If you're the one that's hidden, then you are always going to have the advantage of surprising the person who's doing the searching. And this is what seems to have happened all 3 times with our soldiers. Also, this reinforced the impression among people who are analyzing the situation and watching it develop that these militants for whom this massive search operation is ongoing are likely to have infiltrated from across the LOC.
Okay, so the militants being a lot more trained is one thing, but that they might have come in from Pakistan, I guess, also raises concerns, right?
Yeah, which brings you to the second red flag, which is that why is it that they were not detected while they were infiltrating? Because there are numbers of people who have infiltrated through Jammu, and it's a very low number. The numbers that are available with the army are 3. This number of successful infiltrations. So should we then assume that it is those 3 that are now holed up, or is it another bunch entirely? In fact, we don't even know how many people are holed up. and the soldiers who are looking for them have not been able to set eyes on them. So we don't know the number, we don't know how many groups, if at all. So all that is still in the realm of the unknown. But if there are 4 or 5 or 8 of them, as is being conjectured, then when was it that they actually infiltrated, and why was our counter-infiltration grid at the LOC not able to spot them?
And also, what questions does it raise about our counter-insurgency measures there?
So some people that I have spoken to have said that the Rashtriya Rifles, which is the main counter-insurgency group in Jammu and Kashmir, in that area, it's basically thinned out a bit because they've been redeployed to the line of actual control in Ladakh, where there's a situation with China. And they need more troops there. So some of these people have been redeployed to the LAC. So they are at the moment a little thin on the ground. So maybe that is another thing that needs to be addressed. So that's another red flag. And the third red flag is something that we have spoken about in the previous episode on Poonch, which is that if you've been around so long, if you've been around a month, and they were supposed to have, before the first alert about them, they were already supposed to have been in the area for about 6 weeks. So all told, some 2.5 months already. And if you've been already in that area for 2.5 months, you could not have done it. And if you're foreigners, meaning if you're from across the border, then you could not have done it without some amount of local help. So this is the third red flag.
And Nirupama, in a previous episode, you had talked about how in the Poonch sector, there have actually been a lot of sightings of militants this year. A lot of attempts by them have been foiled. Does that raise concerns considering that we haven't seen that happen previously?
Let's not forget that this Poonch Rajouri area, for militants who cross over, it's an area through which they pass to go to the Pir Panjal and cross over into South Kashmir. It's not somewhere where they like to stay because since the early 2000s, 3-4, the efforts by both the army and the government to actually clean up the area of militancy and then win over the people of that area, they've been very intense. And areas generally thought to have been clean of militants for some time now. So although they've been known to cross over that area and then make their way over the mountains into South Kashmir, before this they've not been known to stay on in that area for a long time. So it raises another question about what is the idea behind staying on in a place for such a long time, staying on in a place where there hasn't been a presence of militants for more than 15 years. So why is it suddenly being targeted in this way? So these are the questions that come up in the mind of observers when you consider this whole operation over 1 month. It's the longest operation, I think, in the whole of J&K in a very long time.
And in the end, we talk about online grocery shopping. The online grocery segment that includes companies like Grofers and Big Basket is now coming up with a new service. It's called Quick Commerce, where deliveries will reach customers within 10 to 30 minutes. In this segment, Indian Express's Pranav Mukul joins us on a call to talk about it. So Pranav, to begin with, could you talk about what exactly is the idea behind this new Quick Commerce vertical and what exactly will it involve?
So, first let me give you some idea about how e-grocery has developed over the last 2 years. Especially since the onset of the pandemic, because of the lockdown and everything, there's a huge shift in consumer behavior towards buying groceries online. And we saw during the pandemic as well that there were huge waiting times on platforms like Big Basket or Grofers and so on. Some new players entered the grocery segment at that time because there was such a huge addressable market and there wasn't enough infrastructure or wasn't enough on the supply side to deal with this demand. So we saw players like Zomato entering this space. We saw players like Swiggy entering this space. And once that peak pandemic rush, it got settled down, there was still a lot of infrastructure and there was an understanding that there's a lot of demand for online grocery. So in that context, this new vertical of quick commerce has emerged, which primarily says that, we'll deliver your goods within 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes. So we've already seen this model evolve in China and in Europe to some extent, where there's a lot of investment in infrastructure, and it's different than how traditional e-grocers have functioned, because if we see for some of the larger online groceries, there's a couple of large warehouses spread across in the city, maybe 2 or 3, or in a city like Delhi, maybe 4 or 5. But in case of quick commerce, to make good on the promise of delivering within 10 minutes, they have a lot of these smaller micro warehouses that are in larger numbers spread across the entire city. So that's the basic difference between what we've seen traditionally in e-grocery and what these Q-commerce guys are trying to do.
And is then the idea that these smaller warehouses will be closer in location to the places they will be delivering to?
Yes, that's right. So what people like Grofers or this new company called Zepto and even others who are getting into Q-commerce are doing is that they are tying up with people who want to set up these micro warehouses as franchisees. So all they need to do is, get a space to set up a micro warehouse, and they'll be trained by people from the online platform on how to manage inventory and all that. And they'll be holding a comparatively smaller stock of goods compared to what a proper bigger warehouse would be stocking. So these will be really, high frequency and fast moving goods that people buy at more frequent intervals, for example, whether it's vegetables or milk, eggs, bread, that kind of thing. So in terms of operations, that's how it will differ from the larger grocery companies.
Okay, so Zepto is one startup you talked about that is trying to get into the space. Who all are the other players that are trying to capture this market?
So in Q-commerce, we've already seen Zepto, there's Grofers, there's Dunzo, there's Swiggy Instamart that's there. Now BigBasket is also planning something on these lines. It's reported that it's planning something called BB Now, which will be its sort of Q-commerce vertical, where it will deliver goods within 10-15 minutes. So yeah, there's a lot of activity happening in this space.
And how big of a market is this projected to be?
So, given the rising adoption of quick commerce, Redseer Consulting, which is a technology consulting firm, it has said that the quick commerce segment is estimated to clock around $5.3 billion in gross merchandise value by 2025. Currently, it is very small. It's just around 300 million. And from there, it's expected to balloon up till 5.3 billion in the next 4 years.
And what do experts say are the challenges this segment might face in trying to grow?
So what experts and what lessons from China and Europe, like I mentioned, are indicating towards is that the quick commerce segment is not really solving an existing problem in the supply side. So it wasn't as if receiving groceries in more than 30 minutes was an impediment of some sort to the consumer. It's an added value that's being offered. And right now, the companies are taking a hit for it, because in any sort of VC funded vertical or segment or sector we've seen is that initially companies would try to lure in the customers through things like free delivery or maybe lower delivery charges, and companies themselves would take a hit for that. But eventually, once a consumer is used to it, then they can start charging. But what experts point out is that given that there is no real need for things like milk or bread or vegetables to be delivered in 10 minutes, at least that's what they say is the general case. Obviously, there might be exceptions. So for this model to scale up, to be able to charge customers that money for this to be sustainable is going to be very difficult. And that's also drawing from experiences in Europe, where these companies have continued to be sort of present in that niche segment of serving only a small percentage of the whole online grocery pie.
You were listening to Three Things by The Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.